Yes, a very good morning to you. It's Tuesday, the 13th of October, 2020. Welcome back to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. And wherever you're watching and listening, you'll know that we've got one of the absolute cream of the crop journalists on the line today. He's a guy who's been very, very busy up here in Queensland covering the AFL and had a couple of weeks quarantine. But Courtney Walsh from the Australian. Courtney, you're out and about, you're off the leash and enjoying AFL finals time in sunny Queensland.
Life is very good up here, I've got to say. There's something about being on the coast and enjoying the sunshine. It's really, it's been a good couple of months. The football's been good in the last couple of weeks and a couple of blowouts, but plenty to like about your home state at the moment, Pete, and very good to be here.
Except, of course, for the fact that it's 6:30 our time as we record here, as opposed to the usual 7:30 or 7 o'clock that we would record. So I thank Courtney Walsh for being on the show. And we're going to rip into it with 5 of the biggest stories making waves in the world of sport. And we will actually touch on the attraction of living in Queensland for one of those stories. But today I wanted to start with tennis. Courtney being, of course, one of the country's preeminent tennis journos, or one of the world tennis tours, really. And obviously the conclusion of the French Open over the weekend, Roland Garros, and 2 quite wonderful stories there, I thought, in terms of the winners of those titles for completely contrasting reasons. And firstly, and you've told me the pronunciation, Iga Swiatek, the young Pole, unseeded. Talk us through Iga's performance, winning the women's singles in Paris and beating Kenin in the final. Tell us a little bit about Iga. Was this something that people saw coming? And I guess more broadly, with 7 of the last 8 women's Grand Slam finals won by a woman 23 and under, what's the current state of play on the women's tour?
Well, I think the current state of play on the women's tour is very bright when you consider the calibre of the tennis being played and also the quality of those winning the tournaments. I know that they're young women, but they're clearly playing exceptional tennis. It's not like some of the older champions like Serena, Angelique Kerber, have retired. It's just that these younger women are coming through and playing superbly. It was a surprise. In one way, it is a surprise that Iga won because she hadn't been ranked higher than 47. On the other hand, if you'd seen the way she's been playing and developing and seen some of her junior tennis, not necessarily. And if you watched her form through the first week of the French Open, where you thought she was favourite by the quarterfinals, which is astonishing given she hadn't won a major, but she was playing so well, exceptional. Serena was obviously injured in the second round. Naomi Osaka wasn't there. Bianca Andreescu wasn't there. The defending champion, Ash Barty, wasn't there. So in some regards, some of the absolute top liners were not there. But she did beat 2 former Grand Slam finalists. She beat Vondrousova in the first round, who made the final last year against Ash Barty. She beat Bouchard, who's sort of showing some of her better form in recent times, on the way back, it looks like. She thrashes Halep, who I think has been the best clay courter for 5 years and a former champion, who actually beat her pretty easily in Roland Garros last year, and then beats Kenin, the Iranian Australian Open champion, in the final. So no doubt about the quality. The manner with which she played with was superb, brilliant from the baseline, aggressive, confident. She showed great poise. Even in the final, when Kenin took a timeout at 2-1 in the second set, she was able to hold it together when Kenin, the American, returned to court. Probably shows the American did have a thigh injury, I think, going in, and she didn't move quite as well. But no, I think a genuine champion. And it's interesting to read those comments from John McEnroe, who said that he thought she would win several majors. I have no doubt she'll certainly win at least another. And look, I think it shapes, it's a fascinating time for women's tennis in the next few years because clearly there's some brilliant tennis being played with great variety, different styles, really interesting to watch.
Yeah, she never dropped a set during the tournament. She conceded just 28 games, the 5th fewest ever by a winner at the French Open. She'd never advanced past the 4th round of a major previously or won a title of any kind on the WTA Tour. She also managed to get through to the semi-finals in the doubles as well, which was very impressive. For the men's draw now, and Rafael Nadal, well, he moved to 20 Grand Slam wins and 13 French Open championships. Places him equal alongside Roger Federer with 20, and Novak Djokovic, who he really brushed aside fairly comfortably in the end in the final there. Novak's back on 17. His post-match interview paints him as a man very content with his tennis journey right now. A couple of things that he said here, and this is via the New York Times. He was touched by praise from Roger Federer. He said, "I think he's happy when I'm winning, and I'm happy when he's doing things well." In terms of records, of course I care. I'm a big fan of the history of the sport. I respect a lot. And for me, it means a lot to share this number with Roger. But let's just see what's going on when we finish our careers. Even if Federer or Djokovic finishes with more Grand Slams than me, it won't affect my happiness 10 years from now. He seems so content with his tennis journey and with life. He touched on coronavirus and the insignificance almost of tennis in comparison to that. What does the next 2 to 3 years look like for Rafa Nadal, on the court, but also in terms of his mentality and his approach?
It was a really lovely piece by Karen Krause, who writes a lot of golf in the New York Times, which he clearly is a very superb writer all around. Touched on, I think, a lot of what makes Rafa such a legend on and off the court. The off-court sort of view in terms of coronavirus, it's not the first time he's sort of expressed those sentiments. We know he missed playing New York as a result of feeling some fear. I had the fortune of talking to him leading into the Australian Open this year, where he's never had as much success in Australia in terms of, well, he's gone deep a lot, but he's only won the one title. But he talked about, he'd just come from Mallorca, where late in the year they had significant floods, really bad flooding. And there's Rafa out in the streets, mopping, cleaning, lifting, trying to help businesses locally get back afloat. So that sort of charitable feeling, or certainly community, I suppose, links is not, he certainly feels in touch with the community, really determined to help people. He sees himself very much as the common man, even though we know that he's anything but common in terms of his, I suppose, his tennis ability and also what he's done in the world of sport. In achievement, I cannot imagine it ever being surpassed. At 13 Grand Slams at the one tournament is astonishing. I was staggered that he was in favourite at one stage through the tournament, as well as Novak's been playing as remarkable as he's been. Rafa just owns the clay. I know there were some circumstances in terms of the balls were not bouncing quite as high at different time of the year, but it is still his kingdom, and he's the king of Roland Garros. So a really superb performance in the final, just amazing. I think he'll be very content no matter what happens in coming years. I think it'll be very hard to hold off as the most successful player, though.
Yeah, I can't help but agree. I said yesterday with Christy Doran on the show that, even if he wins another 2 French Opens, that would take him 5 clear of Djokovic. And if he managed to pick up a title at Wimbledon or the US as well, pretty tough task for Novak Djokovic to claw that back. Our second story today, we move to the AFL and a story by a fantastic journalist in the Australian, Courtney Walsh. And he's looking at the Brisbane Lions and the way that their drafting approach in 2016 has helped set them up to be in a preliminary final this weekend. The go-home factor had been present at the Lions for a long time, and you look at Elliot Yeo, Sam Doherty, Jared Polec, Sam Myers as well, I think it is, and they've clearly struggled to maintain or to retain a lot of talent if you go back 4, 5, 6 years when that club wasn't enjoying a great deal of success. But in 2016, they had some early picks, and they went regional. Victoria, they went Hugh McCluggage, they went Jared Berry, they went Cedric Cox, and they went Alex Witherden, who's just outside the 22 at the moment. Can you talk us through what this clever drafting technique was and why they employed it to try and buck the go-home trend, Courtney?
Look, it was tipped into me on the weekend by someone who I suppose had knowledge of the Hawthorn sort of system and how a lot of younger players at Hawthorn going back a decade ago, the Hodge, Lewis, Ladson, Sewell, even Buddy from sort of WA, and Jared Ruffhead, of course, from Leongatha, had been regional players, and they'd all come together and form these great tight bonds, stuck together, played so well through that period. We know Buddy later went on to join Sydney, but had great success in terms of having common interests, common goals. Chris Fagan arrived there in 2016. Clearly, the place needed a cultural overhaul, and they'd gone. I think the year before they picked up some mature age players, Josh Walker, who's a really nice player, but senior, mature-bodied player. They decided to go young and bringing these 4 guys who had a lot of common experiences from regional Victoria. Cedric Cox from Halls Creek, reporting in Ballarat. It sort of worked for them. McCluggage and Hugh McCluggage, who's a star, the number 3 pick, absolute star. He lived with Jared Berry, and they both moved in with Harris Andrews. You had Alex Witherden from down the road in Geelong. Just had common interests, common areas. They played a lot together. Jared Berry spoke at length yesterday about how that has really helped them in terms of their bonds that they formed. And they feel very comfortable living in Brisbane. They know their own experiences from what they know what makes each other tick, what makes each other work well on the field, make each other work well in the gym. But they also know what they're missing at home in terms of family and friends. But they're able to forge a new life in Brisbane, and they're so tight from what those shared experiences, those common goals, and it's really worked for them. The next year they went and picked up Cam Rayner from Melbourne, the number 1 pick, and it was more central. But last year, a couple of years ago, they returned and picked up Jared Bell, his brother, and another couple of players from country Victoria. So it's clearly, I think, part of the strategy to try and keep a crew of close men together as they grow in coming years. And it's
absolutely it is. And in terms of cities to live in, if you're growing up in regional Victoria, Brisbane of all the AFL hubs is probably the closest to a country town in its vibe, and you also have the opportunity to be prominent as one of few professional teams in the city, but also not be the main act in town. You do play second fiddle to the Broncos and even the Queensland Reds there. So it has worked fantastically, and it's a great example of needs-based drafting, not just in terms of positions to fill, but in terms of character and personality type. Talking about playing AFL in Queensland, our third story this morning comes from the Herald Sun, and it's looking at Collingwood star Adam Treloar and the possibility of him signing with the Gold Coast Suns. That comes on the back of his partner, Kim Revillion, who of course is an outstanding netball player. She's signed with the Queensland Firebirds. They do have a little baby girl who's been in the hub with Treloar and with Kim this year. Treloar signed at Collingwood until 2025, but and his manager Tim Hazel came out and said, look, there's nothing in this. He will see out his contract at Collingwood, and that's the end of that. But you can't help but think when there's smoke, there's fire. He's had the opportunity to live in Queensland for most of this season, and as Simon Black told you in the Oz a few days ago, that has been pretty alluring for players to experience living up here during the winter. Collingwood also need to fit in, re-sign Jordan De Goey, Darcy Moore, Brodie Myercheck, young Josh Dacos as well. Do you think this is the end of the story with Adam Treloar's manager saying he won't go to the Gold Coast Suns, or do you think Gold Coast need to remain vigilant and keep pursuing this, and you think there could be a bit more to play out?
Oh, look, it wouldn't surprise me if Gold Coast absolutely remain, vigilant and also diligent, do the due diligence in terms of any players that are potentially on the move. Every club should be all over what other, particularly highly talented players like Adam Treloar, who could have a real impact at any club he joins. Clubs should be all over them. Congratulations to Kim as well. I think it's a great thing to have that opportunity to continue her outstanding career. I don't think it's uncommon for couples to live apart. We see it in many fields of life. I know sport's different, and I know they've got a young child, but it's not that hard to jump on a plane midweek to get up and back, particularly from the Gold Coast or from Brisbane to Melbourne. It's a little harder at the moment, obviously, with the restrictions, but you're hoping that things change in terms of that. For 2025, it's a heavy commitment, and he did have the choice to make going back a few years ago when choosing Richmond or Collingwood, and he's been highly committed to Collingwood. So I'd be surprised if it makes any significant difference there. I know he's a very talented player and a very driven player, but I guess we wait and see what happens again next year. If things go well for Kim up here and he's loved living up here, well, you can see why he might consider a move. But I don't doubt that he's very committed to continuing on at Collingwood next year and beyond. And I can see how it can work. If it works successfully for them, well, good luck to them. If it doesn't, things can change and you can make the move. It's certainly, he would still well and truly be in his prime as a player, and I think an asset to any club lucky enough to grab him. And if it's the Gold Coast, not a bad result either. But I would be surprised if anything happens until at least next year at the earliest. And who knows what happens. Kim may have a great year and then decide that, no, my life's back in Victoria. I'd be surprised if anything happens at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth noting as well that Gold Coast did ask the question 12 months ago, and there wasn't any major interest in making it happen then, though, reportedly Treloar was a little bit miffed that Collingwood said, well, if the number 1 or 2 picks involved, we might be open to it. But again, that is second-hand knowledge rather than hearing it straight from the horse's mouth. Our penultimate story today, we're going to turn to the NRL now with the preliminary finals this weekend in that competition as well. And we know we've got the Melbourne Storm and the Canberra Raiders. That's going to be a fantastic match. Really interested to see which way that one goes. But the other match, which is probably going to dominate the newspapers a little bit this week, is the clash between the undefeated in about 4 months Penrith Panthers coming up against a South Sydney team who have exploded into action over the last few weeks. And as Dean Ritchie tells us in the Daily Telegraph today, Russell Crowe's breathtaking Bunnies have scored more points in the last 3 matches than any South Sydney team in the past 110 years to become the game's most potent attacking force. They've scored 144 points in their past 3 games. They've also conceded, if I have a quick look here, they've conceded 52 during that time. So they did smash the Roosters 60-8 before beating Newcastle 46-20 and then Parramatta 38-24. On both of those occasions, Newcastle and Parramatta both got the first 2 tries of the match and headed into an early lead, and the Rabbitohs did need to come from behind. I'd suggest that if they were to give the Panthers a 12 or 14 point head start, it might be a little bit more challenging trying to pull them back. But should we be taking the Rabbitohs more seriously as a premiership threat based purely on their attacking potency? We know Alex Johnston's the leading try scorer in the NRL. Cody Walker, Adam Reynolds, Damien Cook, that spine is in fantastic form. And Corey Allen's been a revelation at fullback as well since Latrell Mitchell went down. Maybe they are capable of winning the premiership after all, Courtney.
Well, if you can score with that frequency and regularity, it clearly makes for great, exciting football. And if that continues in the next 2 weeks, you would think that the other team has to score whoever they play in the grand final, for example, if they're able to get past Panther, would have to be prolific in their own scoring. As we know, the deeper you go into finals, the harder it gets logically, given the opponents you're playing. So whether that holds up that style holds up is going to be really interesting, I think, over the next 2 weeks. Nothing like, I suppose, 2 Sydney-based clubs going against each other, I think, in a massive match in the NRL. And I think that really adds to the excitement. We know that, obviously, the Storm in Canberra have played some great matches in the last couple of seasons and have really, there's a nice rivalry there, I think, as well, isn't there, clearly. But to have 2 big city clubs similar to the AFL going against each other, I think always adds some tension and different parts of town, but I think it'll be really fascinating to see. Add the celebrity factor, I'll be watching for sure.
Yeah, bragging rights in Sydney the week of the grand final for the victor, regardless as to whether they can go all the way. Our final story today comes from Julian Linden in the Daily Telegraph, and it's having a look at the Bledisloe Cup situation after, of course, the Wallabies and the All Blacks drew 16-all on Sunday afternoon. It was a phenomenal game of footy, and really was the Wallabies to win at the end, but they just couldn't quite get it done. We saw all over social media in the hours after the game, the All Blacks were in the changing sheds with the Wallabies having a beer. There was a presentation to Wallabies captain Michael Hooper on his 100th test. Both teams have come out and said they're pretty disappointed by the result and certainly not satisfied by the draw. But Julian Linden says if there's one lesson the Wallabies should have learned from their 18-year bid to reclaim the Bledisloe Cup, it's that you should never trust or underestimate the All Blacks, the most ruthless, egotistical team in international rugby. They didn't get to number 1 by being Mr. Nice Guy. So no one in Australia should be fooled by the charm offensive the Kiwis have turned on in the wake of the drawn first test. Of course, he's suggesting that the Wallabies might start to get a little bit ahead of themselves if they're not careful, and the All Blacks' ruthlessness will come to the fore at Eden Park this coming Sunday, where the Wallabies haven't won there since 1986. What do you think, Courtney? Are the All Blacks vulnerable in Auckland? Have we seen the development of a Wallabies team that could go there and get the job done, or the All Blacks slightly off their game and will release that ruthless streak and be back to their best this Sunday?
Well, I'd throw this back similarly to what we were talking about, Rafael and Nadal before playing at Roland Garros on centre court. I think you get the All Blacks at Eden Park, you'd be a foolish man to think that they're not going to be very overwhelming favourites and use every bit of their reputation and excellence at that ground. The fact that it's a fortress for them, particularly against Australia, to their advantage. I love the touch on the PR offensive. We see that in all sports, and obviously this is a different time at the moment where so much has not been able to happen this year. So I can understand the team sharing a drink, etc. But I've got no doubt at all that both teams have been very much hurting, drinking those beers through gritted teeth, perhaps, to an extent, despite the celebration afterwards. I think we'll see a ruthless All Blacks team. I'd love to see Australia be able to hold up. I think they held up well for the most part on the weekend on Sunday. Very hard to beat New Zealand at home, though.
Yeah, there's not many scars for this Aussie team. There's not many who will have played against the All Blacks at Eden Park, but there are a few who will back up from the 36-0 loss last year that came on the back of the Wallabies winning the first Bledisloe in Perth in 2019. Real difference is that there's real optimism and positivity in Australia around the Wallabies and their performance. For New Zealand, drawing with the Wallabies, there's already pressure on their new head coach, Ian Foster. It was his first test match in charge. So just let that sink in. I think the All Blacks will be back to their best. I think they've got the opportunity to make some personnel changes. That being said, there's no reason why the Wallabies can't be better as well. So still looms as a fascinating contest. Courtney, that's all we've got time for this morning, mate. Fantastic to catch up and really to get that fabulous insight into Rafael Nadal is a particular treat. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and hope to catch up soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Pete.
You've been watching and listening to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. We'll see you again tomorrow. Cheers.